Not even a month has passed since this occurred. I have spent my entire life in Nevada, and I am now a senior in high school. Although there isn't much to do in this area, my friends and I have long enjoyed urban wandering. Any place that seemed forgotten, abandoned buildings, decrepit service tunnels, dead malls would be our target. In order to get good shots, we would scale damaged fences and occasionally sneak up on rooftops or into basements. It has nothing to do with breaking things or breaching the law. It was all about the energy. Charles was the only one of us who could consistently locate the most bizarre locations. He was the introverted, enigmatic sort. He had a knack for showing up at places none of us had ever heard of. When he found them, I didn't always inquire how. He once forwarded an image from an unknown Instagram account with few followers, hazy photographs, and a plethora of disturbing comments underneath the postings. There are dozens of deserted mine shafts in the Mojave Desert if you know where to search. According to the description of the relevant post, Charles claims that he had communicated with the account holder, who had provided him with areas to investigate. All it took for Charles to become completely enamored with the concept was that it was just James, our other friend, Charles, and me that Saturday. We hopped in my Wrangler because it was ideal for off-road desert adventures. Nothing was known to us in terms of an exact location, little more specific than a vague region in the center of the Mojave, far out in the desert. Far away from anything was the site that Charles had indicated. It had been over 30 minutes since we had veered off the main road, and the dirt track we had been following no longer resembled a road. It seemed like forever as we drove about. There's an infinite emptiness. There are no markers, buildings, or landmarks. Even though I was aware that we were without service, I could not stop checking my phone. In the rear, James was growing increasingly agitated. He began to accuse Charles of being a victim of a troll account's fraud, and that he had wasted his time with the whole affair. We continued searching because Charles urged us to. He's always been defiant when it comes to navigation, so I thought I'd give in to his stubbornness for a bit longer. In the end, we were ready to end it when James noticed something to the right. As we drew nearer, we could make out what appeared to be more rock and sand at first. Built into the slope, this partially fallen wooden construction, a section of the entrance appeared to have collapsed, yet a shadowy chasm remained visible beyond the pillars that held it up. Although it was clearly man-made, it wasn't particularly large. Of course, it's a mining shaft. Initially, Charles remained silent. In a flash, he retrieved his phone, launched the offline map he had saved from the time we had service, and placed a pin on it. "Told you," he muttered to James before turning to him. James responded by saying he was simply fortunate. However, I couldn't deny that it was rather insane, somehow. After driving aimlessly through the middle of nowhere, we finally came to one. I found a level spot on the dirt shoulder a few yards away from the entrance and pulled into it. We all got out and got ourselves outfitted. We were even given masks to wear by Charles. As our three companions ascended the mine, the situation became even more precarious. Charles retrieved a pebble and hurled it into the water. Here we lingered. It rang out 3 times, then became silent. A few seconds after that, it went into great detail. Charles turned his head to face us and warned that our lives would be at jeopardy if we were to trip while descending. We began our descent. It was fortunate that the shaft was not a straight chute. The descent was steep, but not so much that we needed to use our hands to climb. The surface was unsteady and uneven, and portions of the wall were supported by weathered wooden beams. They looked quite sturdy. The farther we dug, the quieter and colder it became. Underneath, it seemed incredibly ghostly at this point. Not even the entrance's light was visible to us. At last, we reached what seemed like the very bottom. A broader tunnel with several branches emerged when the shaft leveled out. You may have imagined it in your wildest dreams. Rails partially covered in mud, old support beams spaced every few yards, accompanied by an abundant covering of dust, possibly from long-gone carts or equipment. There were pieces of metal and wood lying around. If I may put it anyway, the air smelled somewhat musty. Up until that moment, I failed to appreciate the masks for what they truly were. We began walking after selecting a tunnel. We didn't say much either. Rather than seeking anything, In particular, we were merely exploring. The truth is that there wasn't much interesting things down there. It appeared as though most of the valuable items had already been removed from the area. But suddenly, a sound was heard. Somewhere farther down the tunnel, it was faint. Something was being dragged, that much was clear. I glanced across and noticed that Charles had also come to a halt. At first, I thought it was all in my head. We followed James's signal and turned off our flashlights. In the pitch blackness, we did nothing more than listen. The noise resounded. The noises sounded like metal or even wood being pulled along the floor. Whatever it was, it appeared to be drawing nearer, though the echo made it difficult to discern. For at least 30 seconds, if not an entire minute, we stood there in the pitch black. It was imprecise. A steadily increasing volume of scraping noise persisted. It wasn't too close, yet that didn't lessen its scary sound. After that, James inadvertently turned on and off his flashlight multiple times. Murdering him was my desire. All noise, including scraping, ceased. A sudden, ear-piercing metallic clang resounded from the depths of the tunnel. The object being pulled seemed to have recently been dropped, and immediately following that, the most dreadful scream I had ever heard, one that scarcely sounded human, arrived. Regardless of the volume, we swung around and bolted. Throughout my entire life, I have never run faster. I was on the verge of a panic attack when I heard what sounded like footsteps approaching from behind me. I stumbled while attempting to maintain pace from the rear. I had trouble maintaining my balance after losing one of my shoes. I ignored the agony in my foot and continued on, because I didn't have time to return for it. Coming up, already on their way up the hill, Charles and James were not far behind. The ascent of the stairs was an emotional ordeal for me. No exaggeration when I say that navigating those stairs while wearing only my shoes was the most agonizing experience of my life. It hurt like hell. Every few seconds, I would find a fresh splinter in my hand. The adrenaline was crucial to my survival. Without it, I doubt I would have made it out alive. My foot was in terrible shape. When I managed to emerge into the fresh air, I was practically begging James and Charles to help me to the car. James sprang into the driver's seat because I couldn't handle that. He floored it just as I was about to close the door. Even if we hadn't been following the shaft, we certainly weren't going to stay around to find out. On our silent journey to the closest hospital, we arrived at our destination. I was afraid I was going to black out from the agony. I had to receive a tetanus shot, and I still had trouble walking for days. After the wounds were treated and the splinters were removed, after I was able to walk with less of a limp a few days later, James informed us that he had left his wallet near the shaft, perhaps while he was assisting me to the car. Although he refrained from speaking up first, he now felt it was worthwhile to return. No way were we going back inside, even if we were just at the entrance. Consequently, the three of us utilized the pin that Charles had preserved to return to that location. Even though James' wallet was obviously not there, we did discover something. I am wearing my shoe. Just a few steps away from the entrance to the mine it sat. I approached it with caution before picking it up. Everything was ripped to shreds. It seemed as if someone, dare I say it, had nibbled on it. Parts of my shoe were missing, and there were visible bite marks all over it. After that, we didn't linger for too long. Every one of us is at a loss for a reasonable justification. Your first instinct might be to assume that the person living there is a homeless person. But even if that were true, how in the world had they remained alive for all that time? Subterranean, there was no sustenance. What on earth would they consume? According to Charles, the Instagram account in question ignored his direct messages DMs regarding the incident. I will not be engaging in urban exploration in the desert for quite some time. Ruggedness has always been a part of my character. For as far as I can remember, a vacation means nothing more to me than getting out into nature. Whether that's going fishing or camping, my 6-month partner is just as outdoorsy as I am. And if I'm being really honest, that was probably one of the primary motivations for us to start dating. We decided to try something new a few weeks ago, Tiki and I, for our camping trip. We headed out into the desert. We'd both been in forests, mountains, and lakes before, but the desert provided an entirely new kind of solitude, one that was Open, quiet, and dry, we simply felt compelled to give it a go once. Stargazing was a major draw for us to land in the desert, probably more than anything else. That is something we both adore. When we initially started dating, one of our favorite things to do was to go for long drives outside of town, lie on the truck bed, and gaze at the stars. The fact that this location was described as being remote from any urban areas or sources of artificial light sealed the deal, according to internet reviews. I located a secluded area where it was permitted to camp, open space, a few fire rings, and the night sky, no further facilities, seemed ideal. On that fateful Friday morning, we gathered all of our belongings into the truck and set out on the 3-hour journey. The final 30 minutes or so were spent on a seemingly endless gravel road. Not a single dwelling or indication of habitation could be detected. That, to be honest, was half of the allure. We arrived at the campsite in the late afternoon. As I had anticipated, the entire establishment was deserted. We had the perfect first couple of nights: clear skies, mild days, and chilly evenings. We'd have a few drinks by the fire, smoke a joint, and either sit about chatting about nothing in particular or lie down and stare at the sky. It was so nice to be free of obligations and interruptions for a change. There was also a lot of fun spent joking about in the tent. Disconnection felt nice. On both occasions, though, an unusual sound reached our ears. Very far away, not even in the neighborhood. The noise sounded like a deep, drawn-out sigh or cry. The voice sounded more animalistic than human. When we heard it the first night, it made us both stop for a second. What Tiki meant by her expression was, "Did you hear that too?" I gave a silent nod in agreement. We managed to laugh it off, though. It was likely a mountain lion, coyote, or some other kind of wild animal, I remarked. Indeed, she was in agreement. It was the same thing the following night at approximately the same hour as well. It was just desert fauna, we thought. I mean, we don't usually hear all this stuff out here. We refused to allow the unease dampen our spirits or derail our vacation because of it. I heard footfall outside the tent on the third night. Initially, there were only a few faint crunches, as if someone were gently strolling over dry dirt. Breathing deeply, I listened. Never mind an animal. The pace was too sluggish. Totally still. I considered grabbing the lantern, rousing Tiki, and speaking up, but I refrained. Somehow, I froze. I felt paralyzed all over and my heart was racing. Around the tent the steps did not lead. Just a few steps away, they came to a halt. And then, for what seemed like an eternity, there was complete quiet. While I waited for something else to happen, I hardly blinked as I peered at the tent ceiling. Whatever it was, though, remained silent. I hoped they'd just leave for an eternity as I waited. Suddenly, though, a flick sounded. The distinct, crisp ringing of a lighter. A faint orange light peeked through the tent's canvas, perhaps at the height of the waist, a few feet distant. For a few seconds, whomever was outside kept the flame constant, and then they began to softly wave it around. Totally still, I attempted to remain silent as I gazed at it. The flame, then, grew substantially larger. They must have lighted something, a torch perhaps, since it changed from a flicker to a glow. The individual then suddenly let go of their object of grip. Its low thud against the ground was audible to me. Just as quickly, the tent's side began to glow. I was unprepared for how quickly the heat arrived, and the fire began to spread in a matter of seconds. I was jolted out of my daze by that. When I roused Tiki from her slumber, she understood what was going on right away. With little time to spare, we scurried. We began dumping our belongings from the tent onto the ground. I still have my doubts that we covered everything. As the flames spread, we dashed out of the tent. Tiki emptied one of our water jugs onto the fire, and I did my best to put out the flames by stamping on anything that had taken fire. We managed to sort everything out in the end. The tent was entirely destroyed on one side. I took up the flashlight and began to search the area surrounding the tent for the assailant, who had recently attempted to harm us, but I couldn't find them. It appeared as though no one was around. After Tiki began to gather our belongings, I wasted no time getting going. We began to walk quickly in the direction we assumed the truck was going. Given the lack of landmarks and the darkness, Our navigation was mostly based on guesswork. We realized we were in the wrong place after what seemed like an eternity. About 10 minutes into my stroll, I heard it roaring back, the same far-away cry that we had heard the previous 2 evenings, but this time it continued indefinitely. It continued as if the animal were in continual agony, from a different direction. A second scream sounded, followed by still another, although they appeared to be approaching from behind. It was evident that there were more than one entity in the distance. I seized Tiki's arm and began to run faster without uttering a word. We managed to track down the truck, as if by some miracle, as quickly as I could. We piled all of our belongings into it, and I sped off. But I couldn't go too quickly, because the road was bumpy and in the dark except from my high beams. It seemed like we could be thrown off course at every turn. Finally came to a busy road after what seemed like an eternity. Until I spotted other vehicles again, I continued to speed. Even though Tiki was trying to keep it together, I could see that she was upset and that my attempts to console her were falling flat. In light of everything that has transpired, we have contacted the authorities. My girlfriend and I were out in the desert that night, and all I can think about is how someone could have killed us if I slept better. So that you understand what I'm about to tell you, I'll begin with this. Concerning my mom's background, I've always had my suspicions. The word suspicious doesn't quite capture it, but I'm at a loss for another. She spent her formative years in Mexico before making the solo journey to the United States to earn her bachelor's degree. Everything else is anecdotal. There, she met my dad, got a job, and has been a permanent American resident ever since. Part of me wonders whether I was intentionally blind to details about her life. Before coming to the United States, she completely avoids discussing her history and quickly changes the subject, or makes light of any inquiries regarding it. My dad has always explained it to me, saying that it was because she had some traumatic experiences as a child that were best kept hidden for what seemed like an eternity. That was my belief. Well, I suppose I could. But I must admit, my curiosity began to grow as I got older, and I frequently found myself amazed by my mom's deftness in evading inquiries like that. During family gatherings and the like, this is what I am aware of. Somewhere in northern Mexico, close to the Texas border, was the border town where she resided. Being a border town in general, it doesn't exactly have the best reputation. A joke she told me multiple times when I was little is the only way I've ever learned anything about her parents. As far as she could tell, her mom's side was full of criminals and her dad's side was full of politicians. But she would laugh about it whenever she could. At the time, I didn't take it seriously. Nevertheless, as I became older, I began to question whether there was more to the remark than what I had initially believed. She was silent about her mother and never mentioned her father, who was employed by the government, at least once. Apart from a name, I don't have any more details. I'll just refer to him as R, as I'm not going to write it down. At some point between the hours of 10 and 11 in the morning, I had to get up from my bed and go to the restroom. I overheard my parents talking softly as I walked by our living room. Although I was unable to comprehend her Spanish, I noticed that she kept referring to R by name, as if she were addressing someone else rather than me. I couldn't see her because the lights were turned out, but I could hear her. My tiny self was still a little frightened of the dark, so I turned on the light switch on instinct, even though I knew it was only my mom. She seemed to be expecting my presence. She didn't scream or respond in any way to the light. Rather than that, without further ado, she hung up the phone and shot me an expression I'd never seen before. I obeyed her advice and went back to bed. I think that's everything, for the most part. That is my understanding of my mother's background. Something funny, the name R, and her dad's rather nebulous job description. This has been occupying my thoughts frequently as of late, and what I'm going to tell you occurred over a year ago. I've spent my whole life in Arizona. It is where I was born. My college graduation was still a year away, and I was making my way to see a friend from college while driving across the desert. I was bored with the music since the drive was so long hours worth of road trip driving. Since I am not a podcast fan, I was secretly phoning all of my friends and any woman I was chatting with At some point, I opted to contact my mother. Since we're both huge soccer fans, we were chatting about how thrilling the Champions League games were going to be. Because of her extensive soccer knowledge, we can spend hours upon hours conversing about the beautiful game. To pickup trucks suddenly appeared and blocked the road front of me. I didn't know what I was seeing, as it didn't resemble a vehicle accident. Because I was concerned that someone might be in need of assistance, I proceeded at a leisurely pace. I hadn't informed my mom about what was happening, but she was still on the phone. I pulled over and sat in my car, contemplating whether or not to exit. 3 armed men leaped out of the 2 vehicles before I could react. The sight of another vehicle rapidly closing in on mine from behind caused me to momentarily stop moving. I had no choice but to comply because I was defenseless. With a tap on my door, one of the men signaled for me to exit. A little distance away, the other stood. I got out of my car carefully, hands up. The vehicle following me had caught up to me by that time and was parked a short distance away. I was unable to comprehend the man's Spanish barks as he issued a few orders. As a Mexican American, I feel particularly bad about my lack of Spanish proficiency. The inability to even exchange words with my attackers made me want to end my life at that very moment, but even without a translator, I could tell what they wanted me to accomplish. They had my phone, keys, wallet, and other valuables before I could even blink. It seems like I would be stuck in a desolate wasteland with no way out. When one of the guys got in my truck, things started to go south. My mom was still on the line since I hadn't hung up the phone with her, and my truck was still running. As I observed from my driver's side window, the man seemed to be considering hanging up, but then he drew his finger back as if he had reconsidered. From what I could tell, he was paying attention as I continued to observe. I made the connection right away. I think my mom was having a conversation with him. They were having a serious talk when I finally noticed his lips twitching. The windows and doors were closed, so I couldn't hear a thing, but I could tell they were speaking Spanish. On my life I vow he stated our name multiple times, as if my mom had said it, and he was checking his memory. They must have figured out what was happening, because the other guys eventually stopped protecting me and started walking toward the automobile. The man inside lowered the window, turned to face the other 2 males, and gazed at me. As soon as he finished speaking, the 3 of them pivoted to look at me as though they were assessing my worth. Following that, the discussion waned. The 2 of them strolled back over to me after hanging up the phone and returned with all of my belongings, including the key to my car. They made off with the money from my wallet. As he did it, one of the men grinned at me and uttered the word tax with a thick accent. Never in my life had I been happier to see all my money disappear. The 3 vehicles, including the one trailing behind me, began to accelerate and veer off the road into the desert as I accelerated away. None of the vehicles had license plates, so I scrapped that idea. It had not yet worn off. I contacted my mom again after a short while on the road and wanted to know what had happened. She informed me that her threat to contact the authorities was her only action, because she was able to pinpoint my precise whereabouts by tracking my location. I told her it was plainly false and demanded to know what they had actually discussed. However, she was rather insistent on her version of events and informed me that the majority of the Spanish was simply her arguing her case. I had no choice but to accept her story, even if I didn't believe it. After I begged her, she promised to contact the authorities on my behalf. After a while, we ended the connection, and I continued driving alone the remaining distance. To be quite honest, I used to try to ignore that event for a long time, but eventually I realized I couldn't. It's terrifying to think that my mom may have had ties to a Mexican gang or cartel. Long after she left Mexico, my certainty in this fact is rising. I don't know how much longer she plans to maintain the pretense, knowing that I'm not foolish. I have an overwhelming urge to just ask her, but I'm terrified of causing any unnecessary friction. It could be even worse if she were to tell me the truth. What sort of world would I be entering?